We have a wonderful addition to our agenda today. We have the opportunity to get a little insider look up from DC. We know things in the state of New Jersey are exciting. We know they're equally exciting at the federal level. Each day, new challenges and opportunities being presented. And we have the pleasure today of having Congressman Frank Pallone join us. Congressman is going to be sworn in on January 3rd to his 16th term in Congress, and that will be the 116th Congress. He is going to be chairing, I would suggest, one of the most powerful committees, which is great for New Jersey, the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Yes, let's have a round of applause for that. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the House Energy and Commerce Committee has the broadest jurisdiction of any committee down in DC, covering energy, environment, healthcare, commerce, and telecommunications. Think of all of the things that touches every day. And New Jersey, through our congressman, will be leading that. Congressman Pallone has been a tireless advocate for the state of New Jersey, fighting for New Jersey for over 30 years. And we look forward to getting a little insider view on what you see in 2019, what we can expect from DC, some goals you have as you begin that new journey as the chair of that committee. So please welcome Congressman Frank Pallone.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I think I'll put my coffee over here. I appreciate your inviting me, and I also appreciate the fact that you're in New Brunswick, which is, I guess, probably the most well-known city in my congressional district, which includes most of Middlesex and parts of Monmouth County as well. And I suppose that in many ways I take pride in my district because of what's happening here and how it relates to the future of our state as well as the history of our state. I mean, after all, we have Edison, which is my largest municipality, which is famous because of Thomas Edison, probably America's greatest innovator, who led the technology revolution of his era, not only here in New Jersey, but nationally. And so I always talk about innovation and how innovation often started in our state with Edison and others. And of course, New Brunswick's a great example because New Brunswick is a city that, since I've been in office, and I'm not taking credit for it because the credit really belongs to the mayors and particularly to our current mayor, Jim Cahill, of a municipality that has redeveloped in a way that has created jobs, but at the same time improved the lot of its residents. I picked up the Star-Ledger just a couple of minutes ago, and I saw that Mayor Ross Baraka of Newark was saying how he didn't want Newark to become another Brooklyn, in the sense that even though Brooklyn was creating a lot of jobs and all kinds of new industry and opportunities, high-rises, that it wasn't necessarily helping the residents who had been there. And I agree with him. And New Brunswick is a perfect example, really, of a city that has thrived with new development, new housing, new businesses, but at the same time benefited the people that were here, who've gotten jobs and haven't been displaced for the most part. In fact, I always mention that when we had the recession, the last recession, I guess, in 2012 or whatever, and the unemployment rate in the state and nationally rose into double digits, that in New Brunswick, the unemployment rate never went above 4% during that whole time because of all the efforts to make sure that whatever happened in New Brunswick in terms of the development and what was new still helped those who were there to create jobs. And so we take a lot of pride in our state, and I kind of think that New Brunswick and Middlesex County in my district is a very good example of how things can move forward in a positive way for the residents of New Jersey. So I guess, but I'm not supposed to be talking about our state per se. I guess I'm supposed to talk about what's happening in Washington. And having been there in the last 2 weeks, there's a lot happening. I'm not going to tell you about all the intrigue and everything else that's going on, although you might be interested in that, but that's not what I'm here for. We actually were supposed to be in session this week, and I wasn't supposed to be here today, but because of President Bush's passing and the funeral and everything, they ended up canceling the votes this week. which only means that we're going to be in another week, almost right up to Christmas, because we still have to do the spending bills and the appropriations, and the president is threatening to shut down the government over the wall and all that. But I'm not going to give you that, because I don't think you'll have to read about that in the newspaper or watch it on CNN. What I'd like to talk about is some of the things that I'm working on and that our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee, will be working on in the new Congress, and how that relates to our state and to the nation. I actually will be elected, if you will, to be the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee probably on Monday, maybe Tuesday. I don't have opposition this time, so that's good. So we expect everything to go smoothly. And as was mentioned, the Energy and Commerce Committee has very broad jurisdiction. 60% of the bills that go through the House of Representatives go through the Energy and Commerce Committee. Most notably, it deals with health care, with the environment, with energy, with the internet and infrastructure, and with all interstate commerce issues, not foreign commerce, but interstate commerce. So that's things like, sports betting and, I don't know, Major League Baseball and football, anything that's sort of commerce-oriented, if you will. But so I wanted to just talk about 4 things, if I will, that are sort of happening right now that I think you'll see right out of the gate with our committee and with the Congress as a whole. And of course, the problem that I have is, the background of all this is what? Now we have a Democratic House, we still have a Republican Senate. Actually, the Republicans gained a couple seats in the Senate, and we still have President Trump, who's a Republican, and all the problems, if you will, that come from Donald Trump, not particularly helping New Jersey. In fact, I would argue that many of his policies almost seem like he's purposely trying to hurt New Jersey. I wouldn't go that far, because I don't know if he intentionally is trying to hurt New Jersey, but you certainly get the impression. And one of the things that is very much in the news now that I'm very concerned about is this whole issue of drilling for oil and natural gas offshore in the Atlantic. We had a press conference this week and our delegation is united on this, both Democrats and Republicans, although I guess when I say now that our delegation is united, Democrat and Republicans, we only have one Republican in the whole delegation, so I guess that's not really saying much after the last election. But he announced, or the Interior Secretary and the National Marine Fisheries announced that they were going to allow seismic testing, and they approved 5 applications for seismic testing in the Atlantic. The problem with that is not only the impact of the seismic testing on fish and wildlife and marine mammals, but it usually is a precursor to oil and gas drilling. And Trump has made no bones about the fact that he wants to drill for oil and gas anywhere, right? In the National Wildlife Refuge, in the Arctic, offshore, whatever. We have been very successful, at least in the 30 years that I've been in Congress, in preventing the Atlantic from being an area where it can drill for oil and natural gas. In the 5-year plan that was put into place beginning in 2017 under President Obama, who wasn't necessarily opposed to it, we had to pressure him. Our 2 senators, our delegation on a bipartisan basis, had to push very hard to get President Obama not to allow offshore drilling. But he finally did agree to that, and for 5 years, theoretically, from 2017 until, I guess, 2022, again, that sort of moratorium on the Atlantic continued. That's been there at least since I've been in office for 30 years. But the problem is that when President Trump took office, he immediately said that he might scrap that. Now, I argue, and I continue to argue, that he can't do that legally. But I think many of you know that Trump, from when he was a real estate magnate, never really worried about what the law was. Okay, he just does it, and then he worries later whether you sue him, and if you want to sue him, you spend money, and you might win or you might not. And so he said, well, we're going to, we may revisit this. I don't think you can do that. I think if this goes to court, we could make a very good argument that the 5-year plan is the law. He can't just, through executive order, change it. But he suggested that he might. And it's been very erratic. In other words, normally when you do these things, you have some sort of timeline and schedule so you can say, okay, what are you doing? You have public hearings. But again, the president isn't like that. He just does whatever he pleases. He, changes his mind from day to day. So 6 months ago, he had a meeting, the Secretary of Interior, with the Florida delegation and told them, oh, we're going to exempt Florida because of your tourism industry. Well, of course, I said, well, that's nice. We have one too, but whatever. And then he met with the New Jersey Republicans House members, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago and told them, oh, don't worry, New Jersey's not going to be on the list. This is the Secretary of the Interior. I didn't believe that. They didn't believe that. And ever since then, you know, we've heard that Florida might be included, New Jersey might be included. We don't have any timeline for any of this. Many people believe that this decision will be made by the end of this year, in the next few weeks. And there's some reason to believe that. But again, who knows, right? And if it does happen, we will obviously fight it tooth and nail. We'll go to court. I think we win, because I don't think he has the legal basis as the president just to do that, because this is the law, you know, statutory law. But we'll see. So I just want you to know that's a big issue that's out there, because from our perspective, and I think everyone, probably almost everyone in this room will agree, there's no benefit to New Jersey from this offshore drilling, right? We know what happened with the BP, the spill that, you know, started in New Orleans, but went all the way around the Gulf Coast to the end of Florida, to the southern part of Texas, and just closed the tourism industry down for years. Our industry, tourism, is either the #1 or #2 industry in our state. It certainly would be highly detrimental. We'd lose billions of dollars. I don't know anybody in New Jersey who thinks this is a good idea. So this is something I think that we will continue to fight against. Obviously, the governor, the legislature on a bipartisan basis is very much opposed to it. But I have to mention that because that's very much in my mind right now, and I think directly impacts the tourism industry and everything that's related to that. Now, the second thing I wanted to say is keep in mind that we can't get anything done in Washington anymore unless it's bipartisan. Most would argue that that was true even before November, because you needed 60 votes in the Senate for most things. But it's even more true now where you have a divided Congress, right? So you try, if you're motivated and want to get things done, which I feel that I do, you try to come up with things to highlight things that would be bipartisan rather than things that would be very partisan if you want to get things done. But there are certain things that you feel you have to do as a Democrat, and certainly get out there and try to accomplish, even if you don't know that the president would be for it or likely would even oppose it. So what are the bipartisan things? The bipartisan things that I think we can get done and the public clamors for, I don't know that you necessarily will, but I want to mention them. One is infrastructure. When President Trump was first elected, Hillary Clinton said the same thing, that they wanted to have a major infrastructure bill. Both of them talked about somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion with federal dollars, you know, that would go back to the states for the most part, for infrastructure, to upgrade your roads, your bridges, your mass transit system. Everyone knows why that's important in New Jersey. I don't have to tell any of you. But also would include things beyond just transportation infrastructure. Broadband, which comes under my committee. Safe drinking water. We know after Flint, and we have towns like Newark and New Brunswick, Perth Amboy, that I represent, that need major funding to upgrade their safe drinking water because of underground pipes that leak or you know, cause problems, break. Some of them are over 100 years old. Some of them are still wooden in our state. So it's the broadband infrastructure needs to be included, safe drinking water infrastructure, brownfields and Superfund cleanup to clean up toxic waste sites, which we have more than any other state. It's the energy infrastructure, the grid that needs to be upgraded, the pipeline infrastructure that's collapsing, hospital construction. These are all things that I consider part of this infrastructure bill, not just transportation. And in our committee, we have a bill called the Lift America Act that has all those other things. We don't have the transportation part, but we have the health and energy and Superfund and safe drinking water part. So the problem is that when Trump tried to do this, the Republican leadership in Congress balked because they didn't have any money, right? They passed the tax plan that you know, created a huge deficit. I don't know, it's up to over $2 trillion now, right? And they said, we don't have the money to do this infrastructure bill. So it never happened. President Trump said, well, maybe we can do it with state money or private dollars, but that's absurd. The states, everybody's like New Jersey. We don't have the money to do it. You have to have federal dollars. So what we're saying now is that this is what we want to revive. We think we can get bipartisan support, certainly the president, hopefully the 60 votes in the Senate, to do a major infrastructure bill that deals with all those things. And then you're going to say, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, I don't think we should be going into debt further to pay for it, so we'd have to figure it out, right? I'm not going to get into the details of that today unless you want to know. I have some ideas. So that's probably the biggest thing that can be done that I think you all would support. The second thing that comes under my committee that is out there, again, we think could be bipartisan because this is part of the president's platform, but some of you may not like it, depending what industry you're in, is the high price of prescription drugs. General consensus is that prescription drug prices are going sky high. There's no way to control it right now under the federal government. Obviously, it's a big industry in New Jersey, creates a lot of innovation. We don't want to kill them. But this is on the agenda, and the president, when he ran, said that he would like to have legislation to impact and reduce the price of prescription drugs. And he talked about several things, but the most important were negotiated prices under Medicare, which is what we do with the VA and we do with the military. And so that, I think, is highly likely and something that I would support and that the Democrats would support in the House. So that's something. The second thing is trying to encourage generics more. Okay? In other words, traditionally, generics were a way of trying to create more competition and lower prices. They haven't been so much anymore because we haven't done much to encourage generics the way we used to 10, 20, 30 years ago. So what's out there for that? Well, one of them, which became a subject of the last campaign at the Senate level, was, if you remember, Senator Menendez criticized Bob Hugin because Bob Hugin was the president of Celgene, and he tried to kill the CREATES Act. The CREATES Act, in very simple form, if Bob Hugin were here, he'd probably say you're simplifying it too much, but we don't have a lot of time. So basically what the CREATES Act does is it makes it easier for generics to get the formula when a patent expires so that they can create the generic. Right now, I would argue that many of the pharmaceutical companies, not all, they put up barriers. So when their patent expires, it's hard for the generic to develop a generic alternative. And the CREATES Act essentially makes it possible for them to get the formula and create a generic product. And there are other things too. But that's, again, something that President Trump supports. The president put out a statement about this and many other ways of trying to reduce drug prices. So this is something that I think we have a real good chance at doing. Now, I want to mention a few other things that would be much more difficult, right? But we're still going to try to do them in the House and in our committee. One is to stabilize the Affordable Care Act. You know, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, the Republican leadership tried to repeal it. The president wanted it repealed. Because of John McCain, we were able to stop the repeal. But systematically, since he took office, President Trump has tried to sabotage the Affordable Care Act, issuing junk plan insurance that don't have essential benefits, going to court arguing that we don't have to protect people against discrimination for pre-existing conditions. The tax bill, the Republican tax bill, got rid of the individual mandate, so you don't have to buy health insurance. So all these things have contributed to the breakdown, if you will, of the Affordable Care Act. Nationally, the premiums are going up, and fewer and fewer people are buying insurance. When you buy it, you may end up with a plan that's so skimpy that it doesn't even cover hospitalization in some states. Now, in New Jersey, we did the opposite. The governor and the legislature basically put together what I would call an ACA stabilization bill that prohibited all those things. So now in New Jersey, you have to buy insurance. You have to have an essential benefits package that includes most things you would think of that you would want for your health care insurance. You can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. So if you see what New Jersey did under Governor Murphy and the legislature, you would know what I'd like to do on a federal level, the same thing, essentially. In fact, in many ways, what the state did mimicked the ACA stabilization bill that I and some of the other key committee chairmen introduced. And that's what we will try to get passed. Now, that may be more difficult. Some of the Republicans in the Senate would probably support it, like Senator Alexander, who chairs the HELP committee that deals with health care. I think he would probably support most of that, and so we're talking to him. It also has a reinsurance component, to try to bring more insurance companies into the marketplace by guaranteeing that they won't go broke. So we create more competition, if you will. So that's the two healthcare priorities. One is ACA stabilization, the other is addressing the high price of prescription drugs. Our committee also has jurisdiction over telecommunications and the internet. Here it may be difficult to get compromise as well. The president, through his FCC, Federal Communications Commission appointees, after he took office, had the majority on the FCC. They proceeded to repeal net neutrality, which was the concept of a free and open internet. That, you can't speed up or slow down or not or discriminate, in terms of certain activities. That's the concept of net neutrality, which we have for a number of years, but has been now repealed as of June by the FCC. Democrats on the FCC and in Congress were very much opposed to that. We think a free and open internet is very essential to commerce in this country, and that it's not a good idea to repeal net neutrality. So we will try to put back net neutrality in effect in my committee and as the Congress as a whole. We do think we have a lot of support amongst some Republicans. It may be that there has to be some sort of compromise on it, because otherwise we can't get it through, but we're certainly going to try to accomplish that. The other thing that you've heard a lot about in the last Congress, but nothing happened, is we had a number of hearings on the privacy issue with regard to people's data privacy, right? The whole thing with Facebook, and that they were, using people's data without their permission, even though they say they had it. The way they went about it, really they didn't. So we probably will address that as well. And the only other thing I did want to mention is the, on the environment and energy front, I mentioned an infrastructure bill that would deal with the electricity grid. But the larger issue, if you will, is climate change. As you know, or you may not, in my committee, the leadership of our committee and the leadership of the Republican Congress in general were essentially climate deniers. In other words, they denied that climate control was human-induced. They refused to have any hearings or address the issue. The president went ahead and said he's going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, is trying to kill the Clean Power Plan and the energy efficiency standards for cars and trucks. Obviously, all this is very detrimental if you want to address climate change. And so we are going to start having hearings. We are going to have hearings and talk about what can be done to address climate change. And we obviously would like to bring back the Clean Power Plan. We'd like to have the fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks. And we'd like to start moving towards renewables in a way that makes sense over the next 20, 30 years, and cut down on the use of fossil fuels. So that, the main thing there is initially the oversight and then the legislation that we might put together to try to address that. But again, the president is a climate denier. How far we can go with the Republican Congress on some of this is very much an open question, but we're going to try, and we're certainly going to highlight it. So I think I'll stop with that. I don't know, Frank, did you want to have any questions or anything? I'd be glad to take a few if you want. Sure. Oh, Senator. Well, I guess not anymore. I still think so. Once a senator, always a senator. Once a congressman,
absolutely
always
right.
a congressman.
Congressman, I'd like to raise a subject that may be a little esoteric, but it would affect the cost structure, I think, of every business in New Jersey, and that is the federal regulation of the transmission of electricity, which is handled by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And as I'm sure you know, there have been a number of decisions coming down from FERC which could greatly increase the cost of electricity in this state. And I would simply encourage you to lead our congressional delegation in standing up to what's going on there. I think if we rose up in a bicameral, bipartisan way and push back as other states have, I think it would be important for our business community. And certainly the BPU stands ready to support you in any way we can.
Well, we will. I mean, I had to get into more details, and maybe you and I should have more of a conversation. But FERC obviously comes under our jurisdiction. And I do think there are many things that have to change at FERC, right? And we can talk more about it. The one thing I thought you were going to say, but I don't think that's what you had in mind, was you remember we had in Monmouth County this big transmission line, right, that JCP&L and First Energy wanted to build. And I and the mayors, again, this part of Monmouth County is mostly Republicans, so it's mostly Republicans officials with myself and the freeholders that opposed that. And part of what came out of it, and it was, you know, they're not doing it, the BPU ultimately agreed with us. But part of our lesson from that was that we think that FERC and the PBMs, is it the PBMs? PGM, I'm thinking of the healthcare now. Yeah, I better watch it. That they put too much emphasis on the large transmission lines, right? And that, you know, this was all in theory to enhance reliability, because the theory was that, you know, there were problems with the reliability of the lines and the distribution and all that. And what we were trying to say is that we don't think that building these big transmission lines, which seem to be favored by FERC's policy, were really helpful. And there was an alternative way of addressing reliability, which we thought more was a problem with distribution lines, and you didn't need this big, you know, these big power lines. Because after all, you know, in the state, increasingly the population growth is more in the cities than it is in the suburbs, right? So it wasn't as if there was this huge explosion of new housing and businesses that needed all this additional electricity. In fact, we were afraid that First Energy was just going to sell it somewhere else, right? So that's just an example of where I don't particularly like some of FERC's policies and think that need to change. But I don't think that's what you're talking about. But we could sit down and talk about it more.
I saw one more hand. That was
Yeah.
the last question.
First, thank you very much for the clarity of what you shared. My sense, being on the outside looking in, is that the number of bills that have been passed by Congress is very small compared to prior years with 30 years experience. Am I correct? And if so, what can a room full of business owners and advisors and key people at companies do to maybe enable Congress to have the role they used to have? And it seems like everything's executive orders now.
Well, you know, you and I we could go over to Rutgers and, you know, have a whole year seminar. Maybe we could be visiting professors talking about the imperial presidency. I talk all the time, when anybody wants to hear it, which is mostly nobody wants to hear it, about how in the 30 years I've been in office, the power of the presidency and the use of executive orders and regulation has increased, and Congress's power has been diminished, and how that violates the Constitution and what the Founding Fathers wanted and what's good for the country, right? Now, I think that Trump is, of course, the worst example, right? I mean, you know, I know some of you maybe cringed when I said that he does whatever he pleases and doesn't care. But I mean, I can make a case for that. He just issues executive orders. He issues, the agencies issue regulations. They don't seem to care whether or not they have the statutory authority to do it. The answer is always the same: sue me. And we have so many lawsuits because of that. So, you know, I think that Congress needs to somehow explain to the public that this isn't what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, the best example are earmarks, right? We don't have earmarks anymore because that's a bad thing for Congress to earmark money. Well, that's exactly what Washington and Jefferson and Madison envisioned, because they didn't want the executive earmarking the money, because they figured, and those bills had to originate in the House, because the House was the people's house that had to run every 2 years, and that was most responsive to the people because they had to run every 2 years. Remember, the Senate was appointed when the Founding Fathers were there. They saw the Senate as like the House of Lords, and they were worried about the the presidency because of, you know, George III and the British monarch. We have gone so far away, you know, and President Trump is the worst example of it. But believe me, the ground was set by Clinton and Obama and the Bushes, so it's no surprise that he thinks that. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a huge problem because I think that our democracy is negatively impacted by this imperial presidency. That's what I call it. Was that your question, or did I just go off on a tangent? All right, thanks a lot.